Attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, are we ready to go?
I believe we are.
All right, hello everyone and welcome to Be Heard, our advocacy webinar for youth and parents for advocates. We're going to be talking about case, class, and legislative strategies. Just to start off, my name is Kayla Van Dyke. I'm a youth engagement coordinator here at NACAC, and my personal connection to this topic is that I was actually raised in foster care for 11 years in Minnesota. And since then, I've had years of opportunities to work with a lot of amazing organizations, including NACAC, Foster Club, CCAI, and the YADA Network as an advocate, as a staff member, and I've been in my current position with NACAC and CCN for about a year now.
And my name is Kim Stevens. I have been at NACAC now for, I think, close to 16 or 17 years, first as a board member and since 2006 as a staff member. I'm connected to adoption and foster care personally because my husband and I adopted 4 kids out of the Massachusetts foster care system. And I am connected to this topic as an advocate because my favorite thing to do is to storm the castle with youth, young adults, and caregivers who are connected to the child welfare system. We just want to give you a little bit of housekeeping about the webinar, first of all. As you can see, and if you can't see, please type us a message quickly in the question and answer box to let us know that the slides will be moved forward by us on the presentation. You can either listen through your computer speakers, or if you're having trouble with that, you can use the audio portion, go down to the audio portion of the GoToWebinar control panel and switch to Use Telephone, then call the number listed on the control panel and enter the PIN. Everyone will be muted throughout the presentation, but we will be paying attention to the question box. If it's a question that can be easily answered and it seems pertinent to just an individual, I'll probably type the answer right there in the box and send it back to you. If it is a question that probably everybody will want to hear the answer to, we will likely bring it up during the presentation. And we will stop at least one portion, at least one time during the presentation to take questions, and we will have question and answer period at the end. If it seems as though there are many questions, we may stay on until about 15 minutes after the hour and invite you to join us if you can.
So just a little background, today's webinar is supported by the efforts of Jockeying Being Family and the North American Council on Adoptable Children, NACAC. So the webinar that you're going to be listening to today is through our Community Champions Network here at NACAC, and the Community Champions Network is supported by Jockey Being Family, which is Jockey International's corporate citizenship initiative to strengthen adoptive and foster families for successful futures. And this is the program that I primarily work on with my youth work.
So just a bit of an overview. We want to go over several different things in terms of advocacy. Certainly you need to know what it is you're asking for, and we'll talk a bit about how you both identify, understand what that means, and present your ask. You have to be able to have partners in your efforts. Almost any advocacy effort that is a singular or an individual effort, unless it is about a singular or an individual event, is not going to get very far. So you do want partners. We want to help you understand how best to persuade the stakeholders that they want to either do what you're asking or join in your effort. We have found, and we'll talk more about this throughout the webinar, that we have the most success when we engage both youth and parents or their caregivers in the advocacy effort. They both have an experience to share, and the youth voice can be really quite powerful in moving that forward. We'll go over some strategies and some ways to think about strategy, implementation efforts. We'll talk a bit about communication, and I will refer you to another tool that you can get through another program of NACAC's once we get there. We'll talk about your follow-up to your advocacy effort and go into some real specific items regarding legislative advocacy.
I believe this one's you, Kim.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kayla. I thought it was you. I was partnering with my young adult. So, understanding your ask, of course, first you need to know what it is that you want to accomplish. Oftentimes, and myself, I've been guilty of this in my earlier days as an advocate, both on behalf of my kids and family and in my work. We sometimes are so certain that everybody should see things from our point of view because we're living in it day to day that we haven't quite formulated what it is that we're asking for. So we really want to hammer home for you folks that we don't want to simply point to the problem. We don't simply want to say what's wrong. What we want to do is to use this opportunity that we have to come up with a solution, a viable, workable, sustainable solution, and present that as our ask. We also need to know the different levels of system change. Certainly there's case advocacy that I think probably everybody on the phone has had to do or on the webinar has had to do in the past, whether it's for your own particular need or the need that one of your children has had. Class advocacy, however, takes it to another level. And that is when you talk about an issue that does not affect just an individual or just a small group of people, but in fact can affect a nation of people, a huge community of folks. And because it's a class advocacy issue, it does also give you the opportunity to gain more partnership, more collaborators, and get more voices involved. You need to be able to identify at what level of the system your issue has to be addressed. Is this a federal issue? Does it affect the whole country? Is this a state issue or a county issue? In the case of Canada, if it's a provincial issue, likely, or rather if it's a child welfare issue, it is likely only to be either provincial or local, as there is not a federal overview for child welfare issues. So there is a little bit of a difference there, and as we talk, if there are Canadians on the phone that would like us to clarify things, please stop us and let us know. And then finally, is the issue something that can be resolved through statute or law? Can it be resolved with a regulation? Can it be resolved simply by writing a new policy or interpreting an existing policy in a correct manner? Or is it finally just a practice issue that people need to be informed on how better to do the work that they're doing? And then finally, the very most important thing to think about when you're framing and understanding your ask is that always should be presented in terms of improved outcomes for children and youth. This is about the kids, not about the adults.
All right, so now we're going to talk about creating your ask. And being able to create your ask in an effective way is a crucial component of any advocacy project or cause. No matter how good your ideas are or how badly what you're trying to change needs reform, how you ask and frame your concerns and solutions are important. The first thing you want to consider when you're formulating your ask is the perspective that you're taking. Depending on who you identify as being your main benefactor of your ask, you can rally different kinds of support and resources. For instance, if your ask is from the point of view of a young person, both the way you frame your ask and who you may seek as a potential partner could vary drastically from a systems point of view. In this case, your ask might focus on the differences these changes could make for individuals instead of a larger structure of policies or finance reform. Secondly, you need to make sure that your ask is coherent. This means that it's to the point and it leaves out language and jargon that might be unnecessary or difficult to understand. Sometimes we're such an expert in what we're trying to achieve, we've been so involved in it for so long, we come up with a lot of language and information around it that we take for granted, that we don't necessarily understand that our stakeholders might not have firsthand. And so making sure your ask is simple, very to the point, and that anybody could understand it regardless of their background is going to be very important for you. Like we mentioned before, your ask also needs to be solution focused. Legislators and other stakeholders don't want to hear empty complaints. They need to know that what you're asking them to do is something that is feasible, it's something that you've prepared, and it's relevant to what your stakeholder can provide. And that's going to be very important for you when you're bringing your ask to the table. And lastly, you want to keep appreciative inquiry in mind as you're framing your solutions. Appreciative inquiry is simply the idea of highlighting what has worked and how that work can continue to bolster progress. It's rare for a system or program to be entirely flawed from ground to ceiling. In reality, there are always pockets of success that you can identify to highlight what works. And as you move forward, it's going to be important for you and time saving to be able to retain and identify what's worked well in the past so that you don't need to completely start over, reinvent the wheel when you're proposing new solutions. All right, now we're going to move on to identifying partners. And again, we mentioned before how incredibly important this is. There are a lot of organizations, projects, programs, and other individuals that are likely to share in the work that you're doing or looking to do. These people can provide an invaluable platform for you to begin gaining steam on your initiative and build on the support that you already have. The first thing that you want to consider is if there are any other groups already working on the issue you're interested in. You might consider whether or not they'd be willing to partner or collaborate with you. This is honestly one of the easiest ways to build your potential impact as an advocate because you'll likely be able to share in the resources and support already built up by your partner or collaborator. And alternatively, sometimes potential partners might be less obvious or hidden in your community. There are a lot of stakeholders involved in the child welfare sphere, and many of them have a vested interest in promoting positive changes in the system. Some of these people might include other youth and caregivers, child welfare agencies, support groups, youth service organizations, mental health providers, again thinking outside of the box of the different people that have tendrils involved in child welfare, educators fit into that box. And lastly, one we don't have on this list, but everyone's favorite partner, funders. Those are an amazing community partner to have if you can find them.
Now we want to talk about how to persuade the stakeholders to be partners with you. First, you need to identify the right audience, understand how the issue might affect them, understand the hierarchy, understand exactly who has been talking about this issue before. You want to know both who is in charge in name, but also who is in charge in action. And one of the places where I know some great advocacy was done on behalf of adoptive families was in the state of Virginia several years back. The governor was the man who, in name, was important in the hierarchy. But it turned out that his wife, in action, was pushing him to do certain things and had a great affinity for the adoptive population in the state. So adoption advocates, youth and parents together, as well as professionals, would always go to the governor's wife to talk to her. She was the one that was going to make things happen. He was the one that was going to implement what his wife had told him needed to go on. That also speaks to a personal connection. I believe that she did have a personal connection to adoption. I know in the state that I began doing in Massachusetts, we were able to form a partnership with, for me, a very unlikely partner, a very wealthy older gentleman who was staunch Republican conservative, much more, that political leaning than myself. However, he and his wife were raising 2 grandchildren who they had adopted, and his wife had been adopted out of foster care. And so this legislator became my absolute best ally in my very liberal thinking work because we had both a personal connection and an emotional tie to the issue. Added to that, for this particular individual, he had a public image that he wanted to uphold, much like that governor in Virginia. They were able to look out into the world as good guys, as guys that understood the issues of families and kids, and as people that wanted to make a difference. So it really did help their public image to be a part of our advocacy efforts and to work with us side by side. And then finally, you have to be able to help others understand why they should care about the issue that you're bringing to them along sort of a what's in it for me attitude. And that's not to say that people are bad, thinking always what's in it for me, but people are human. And their motivation, their very personal motivation, is important to them. Does this issue affect their constituents? And if so, paint that picture for them. Let them know how their constituents will love them if they do the right thing. Does it save money? Certainly fiscal concerns are very big for the legislators and for the ministry in both of our countries. And if it doesn't save money, does it at least maximize outcomes? Can we show that if you invest this money right now up front, you're going to save money down the road because your outcomes are going to be better? And finally, doesn't make that decision maker or politician look good.
Oh, 1 second. All right, so youth and parent engagement. Another component of persuading stakeholders that we kind of touched on just a little bit was the idea of putting a face to the issue. When you watch, infomercials and commercials kind of prompting you to donate to the Humane Society, they show you animals. That's how people form connections, is by visual contact, physical contact, being able to hear those personal stories, being able to witness the impact of that plight on an individual person. And so many times in the process of persuading stakeholders, being able to have advocates there is so incredibly important, as I'm sure many of you know. But even being able to extend that circle, to push it out, to incorporate more people, and specifically on an issue that you can bring in a young person or an adult with a personal experience with that, being able to hear it from their mouth is so eye-catching for legislators, for stakeholders. In the times that I have served on testimony and I've been witness to them, testimonies that come from young people especially, come from people that have experienced what they're trying to change personally, is so profound. It gets people's attention and it makes them listen up more so than a third-hand story. So about finding those youth and parent supports. As I mentioned briefly before, the idea of partnering with like-minded organizations to strengthen your advocacy potential is a really good route to go for any advocacy goal. And I wanted to go over a few examples of organizations that you might consider partnering with. And actually, I've worked with several of them. So the first three listed are specific national organizations, which include NACAC, of course. We frequently take in technical assistance requests. We help with both parent and youth support work. Foster Club, which is the national network for young people in foster care. Foster Club is actually where I got my start in advocacy. They provide an internship, they do advocacy, they create materials, they do trainings. They've really been able to influence a lot of legislation, again, coming from that perspective of putting a face to the issues. It's much harder to say no to someone in person who has personally gone through what they're trying to make legislative changes with than it is someone that's just representing that story. And lastly, there is CCAI, the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute. They also do advocacy, and I know they also have a phenomenal legislative internship for former foster youth and adopted youth. Lastly, depending on the state you're in, you could consider reaching out to local state youth advocacy board, the YAB group, as well as state and national associations for foster and adoptive parents. All right, so youth and parent engagement techniques. Getting people involved can be incredibly difficult, especially when you yourself feel such a fire for advocacy and want to make your initiatives come off the ground. Getting people on board is going to be a big step for you. And like I mentioned before, collaboration is the easiest way to do that. If you had the opportunity to partner with us, CCAI, Foster Club, for example, you're able to kind of pull on not only the resources they have, but the huge network of individuals who are already trained and already bringing a whole lot to the table. Alternatively, bringing people to the table for the first time can be very challenging for a number of reasons. I, for instance, when I was 18 and about to emancipate from foster care, I had no real interest in further contact with the system. I really had the idea that I was going to be able to leave foster care and never have any kind of association with it ever again. 6 years later, here I am. And partly the reason that happened was because of an internship that was available for me. One of the limiting resources in my life was that I was graduating from high school and I had a whole summer that I needed to make money and I needed to find housing in between college. And so the reason that I first felt this spark of advocacy was simply because there was this opportunity available for me that would provide me housing and food stipend and a little bit of money during the summer. Some easy incentives you could consider might include something as simple as transportation to the event or even food. Oftentimes resource scarcity functions as a barrier to involvement, especially for a population that's more likely to experience outcome disparities. Another thing to consider is that engagement isn't necessarily something that happens for individuals just because they have experience with foster care and adoption. Engagement is the important process of helping someone cultivate a sense of ownership over what they've experienced and the changes they believe will make a difference in the system. You can help build that passion for changing the system by helping to draw those connections for youth and adults. Going back to incentives for a little bit, you may even want to draw people in by making their advocacy involvement fun through an activity or a treat. This is especially true for young people, which is what many states do for older foster youth. Oregon has an amazing statewide retreat in which they really promote young people to, speak about their experience. They have a youth panel every year, and although the young people themselves may not have an initial interest in advocacy or staying involved with the system, making it fun and making it less structured and rigid really is a way to kind of just cultivate that interest in people and keep them connected. Next, I've listed the idea of compensation and stipends. Now, this is typically for individuals who are already very engaged. Now, recognizing young people and adults as having expertise through their experience is really crucial to building a professional and trusted relationship with advocates. In instances in which you're asking an advocate, again, especially young people, to participate, to travel or take lead on a large project or presentation, compensation is becoming more expected. And this is because institutions like CCAI and Foster Club, for instance, because they train their young advocates at such a high caliber, they've come to really expect that as a compensation for their experience, and also because, again, resource scarcity is a barrier to involvement many times. Typically, compensation can happen through stipends or even just a meal allowance for the duration of the event. The idea isn't necessarily to provide a paycheck, but just to offset the cost of participation for an event so that the participation isn't a detriment to them. We want to keep advocates involved, but we also don't want that involvement to be detrimental to their education or their housing stability. And oftentimes the excitement of being involved in those events will outweigh some of those other considerations, again, especially for young people. And so it's very important, if you are the adult coordinator, if you're the person providing this opportunity, that you make those allowances for their participation. Oh, I just realized I skipped an element of my last slide. And this one's important, so I'm just going to go back and quickly cover it really quick. It's the idea that advocacy is often an avenue for healing for young people, and this is an idea that is well known for experienced advocates, but it's not necessarily talked about a lot as a product of advocacy. When young people and adults, and again, I talk a lot about trauma in relation to young people. I've been a mentor for a lot of other foster youth, but adults also carry a lot of trauma from their experiences as well. In the instances that they've, had young people they imagine they were going to adopt, not stay in their placement, or other issues arise. Trauma is something very present for adults in this context as well. But the idea of being able to make a difference by sharing your story, being able to see the impact of that on other people's lives really reshapes the way an advocate will engage with that potentially traumatizing memory and allows them to be part of the solution. This creates a connection to your cause and can prompt further engagement as a result. And the process in itself is really inspiring. It makes people feel that emotional, personal connection to the issue that in many cases is much more engaging than just, the financial or the fun. It's something that, emotionally is very fulfilling for them. So now we can move on to the ladder. All right, so this is the ladder of youth engagement. Essentially what images like this are intended to do is inspire a conscious consideration for how we as adults engage young people. It can be incredibly difficult to get young people involved, especially someone of the age of 18 who may not be emotionally mature enough to initiate or self-sustain their own involvement. However, as adults, and oftentimes as the person creating or introducing this young person to an opportunity, we have an especially important role to play in how a young person is treated and prepared for that involvement. Now you might be wondering why this is specifically a youth engagement ladder and not a general engagement ladder. The reason for that is simply that as adults we often struggle to identify the most appropriate way in which to involve youth in advocacy. It's a common pitfall for youth engagement where an adult will kind of not trust in the capabilities of a young person, probably because they haven't personally instigated them, and not authentically engage them in a quality way. Essentially, the first three rungs of the ladder represent that well. Now, the idea of this ladder is that it's climbing up towards your ideal. And the first three rungs of it are very much where youth engagement started in child welfare. It's manipulation, decoration, and tokenism. You know, young people's stories may be being used without their consent. The stories, you know, may be used in a context a young person isn't comfortable with. They're certainly not consulted about it. In the case of tokenism or decoration, young people might physically be there either to show off their youth involvement or to just simply meet a criteria for a program. All of these are terrible examples of engagement. They don't really require the youth to even physically be there, and it is slightly predatory. Moving up on that ladder, though, we have the idea of assigned. Sorry, let me just read this really quick. Assigned but informed. So that, again, as we go up higher on the ladder, young people become more aware of their role in this event or opportunity. And even going farther up, the idea of being consulted and informed. So a young person knows why they're there, they're informed about their role, and they, on the fifth rung of the ladder, they actually even have the ability to give input. And this is really where authentic engagement really starts to happen with young people, because it opens up a dialogue in which they can give you true, sincere input based on their own experiences to help you really cultivate a better direction for your project. Young people have an amazing amount of experience to give you. Imagine trying to, create the most comfortable wheelchair for someone, and you yourself have never been in a wheelchair. The things that you imagine to be wheelchair problems, the things that you imagine that this wheelchair needs, might be incredibly skewed by your lack of perception of what it's even like to be in a wheelchair. And again, foster youth for a very long time, adoptive youth, even adoptive parents in this case, their opinions have been marginalized. They may not have been given a voice. Maybe they've been perceived as being incapable of sharing something that contributes to the cause. And what we found in the last couple of years, especially if you follow child welfare legislation, is that the directions capable coming from young people, from people that have experienced these things, really lead away from the common pitfalls associated with child welfare and danger and safety. There's a lot these young people have to contribute if you engage them appropriately. Up through 6 through 8, these are all, again, amazing avenues for engagement, and these avenues for engagement tend to be more dependent on where the young person is and what level of training they've been able to have. So adult-initiated and shared decisions with young people. Again, this is top tier of youth engagement. That's a really amazing place to start. The young person doesn't necessarily need to have an incredible amount of training to be able to participate in that rung, but they are respectfully included, informed, and consulted in regards to it. 7 is youth initiated and directed. Again, this idea scares a lot of adult organizers and advocates, especially if you're uncomfortable with young people taking a position of authority. And it absolutely does require a young person to be highly motivated, well-trained, and have a lot of experience with personal advocacy. The very top of this ladder is youth-initiated and shared decisions with adults. I also like to consider this rung youth and adult equity. It's the idea that young people and adults come to the table equally and both share in the benefits of what they're trying to achieve and are both seen as equal partners and leaders. That was a little bit of a mouthful. I hope I didn't lose anybody. All right, so back onto this idea of training and preparing people for their involvement. So now we talked about engagement techniques. Let's change that conversation a little bit. So after you've engaged someone, your next responsibility is really making sure they have the proper training to be protected and to have a full, complete, and healthy engagement in the project. Now, strategic sharing is a foundational training for any advocate. It can be found in multiple incarnations throughout the internet, as well as on our fact sheet, and was developed specifically to help foster youth share their story in an effective way. As many of you might already know, revealing personal details about our own stories can be hazardous for many reasons. There's a story outlined in the strategic sharing doc from a man named Dan Knapp. When he was a teenager, he was approached by People magazine. And in that interview, he actually revealed a lot of very personal details about his story that he hadn't had adequate time to process. And he also gave away details, including his biological sister's name, which then exposed a lot of details about her that she was, she had never shared with anyone before. That interview actually went on to damage his relationship with his sister. And again, that story really is just to highlight that without active guidance on strategic sharing, it's possible for a young person to reveal details um, and perspectives of their story which could damage their relationships with existing family members or friends and potentially trigger damaging emotional responses. So strategic sharing as a document, as a foundational training, I really consider it step one. It gives youth and adults, the training they need to be able to frame their story effectively in a way that's going to make a difference and it makes sense with their ask, and it protects them again from, the situation that Dan had gone through, the idea of potentially oversharing. And again, that in itself takes a lot of exercise and practice. And this single, document isn't going to train an advocate to be perfect on any of these skills. But it is definitely, the first place you should start. There are many places that actually do this as a training, strategic sharing. NACAC is one of those places. And if you are looking to get into advocacy on a public level, I definitely recommend, reaching out either to us or really taking a long, hard look at some of the materials for this that already exist out there. And lastly, the reason that I really like strategic sharing, again, the idea of protecting our advocates, making sure that their involvement is safe and constructive. It outlines the idea of coaching advocates through triggers and trauma, and they do that by kind of structuring these check-ins called debriefs, which are a way to give feedback to advocates and also allow them to process their involvement in a way that doesn't sustain emotional damage for them. Alright, so while we're setting up this video, I'm just going to give you an introduction. This is a testimony by Donna Sanders, and I love this testimony. I think it's one of the best. That's come out recently. You can tell this young person is prepared. Her story is concise, even though she's talking about topics that are very sensitive, her mental health diagnosis. She broaches the subject with just enough vulnerability to really put that emotional connection in there without exposing details that could be, damaging for her if, her friends, her family, her job were to search this video. She is incredibly well prepared. Her ask is very present and concise, and we're going to watch this for about 6 minutes. Can we hear this video?
That's as loud as it is on YouTube, Kayla.
Okay, so how about I just talk about that video a little bit since I'm not sure we're going to get it to play well enough. If you have time, and especially if you're preparing a young person to give a legislative testimony, study this video because it is perfect. You can tell that Donna is coming to the table. She's very comfortable. Um, Her adult supporters really mention the fact that she has started her own advocacy initiative on psychotropic medication. So again, this is the top rung of that youth engagement ladder, in which both adults and young people are coming to the table with shared equity in what they're trying to achieve. She lays out her argument very linear, and she avoids a lot of the common pitfalls of young advocates by not sharing unrelated or irrelevant details of her story. She really keeps it to the point. She brings in lots of relevant data and information alongside of her testimony, which exemplifies these things and the impact that these larger statistical occurrences have on individuals, and she demonstrates that perfectly. I'm sorry I wasn't able to show you the video, but it is available on YouTube. Just look up Donna Zender's testimony on prescription psychotropics medication for foster youth.
So I really want to talk a bit about the role of the adults in this equation as a leader and as a partner in advocating with youth. Your job really is to step up as a leader, just and when I say as a leader, I don't mean as the leader of the charge or the leader of the effort, but as a leader in youth-adult partnership. Your role is to make sure that there's a place at the table for your youth partners. Your role is sometimes to step up from the table, virtual or real table, to give a seat to a young person at the table. Your role is to be a leader in role modeling how adults and youth partner together, and to really call other adults when they are doing such things as tokenism, using jargon. I've been in meetings where there's been young people at the table and the sort of the big heads around the table go around and talk jargony for 10, 15, 20, even 30 minutes before they even think to turn to a young person and say, and what do you think? My role in that situation is to stop them as soon as I realize that's what's happening and give the young person an opportunity to speak first and not just to nod or agree with what's been presented. And I also think our job as leaders is to say that we don't ask just one young person, or if it's another person that's going to be in a minority, we never ask whoever is going to be the minority representative at a table to be the only person there. If it's a group of professionals and we're inviting caregivers, we don't ask just one caregiver, we ask more than one so that they have some safety and they have some collaboration and a partner in that work. That's the first thing around partnering in this. But further from that, everybody's role in the work of advocacy is to identify the problem. And as we spoke earlier, to identify the problem in terms of what is the solution. Not just the problem, but the solution itself. We have to go out there, do our research, do our due diligence to find data about the problem. How many people does it affect? How deeply does it affect them? At what points along their journey are they affected? All of this information is data that we can find online usually. The Child Welfare Information Gateway has some wonderful resources, and when you receive through your follow-up email a lengthy advocacy information piece that we're sending you, there are a number of different sites that we've also given you where you can go and build your own data source with what's out there in AFCARS and other sources. It's our job to come up with our goals and objectives. Exactly what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are our short-term goals and what are our long-term goals? And for what reason? And very, very important to make sure that we start with a short-term goal that we are pretty darn certain is going to be a winner, because everybody wants to join a winner. If we start off and we are not successful, we run the very damaging potential of losing partners. So we want to start with the first step that is going to win. We want to make sure that we know who the proper decision makers are. It's really frustrating to go out there and put together a huge advocacy effort and deliver all of your information only to get to the end of a presentation and have the person you're speaking to say, you know, that's really compelling. I'm really interested, but unfortunately I have no power over this. You need to talk to so-and-so, or you need to go to this department, or you need to go to that office. So make sure you know from the start who to speak to. You want to be able to gather support, whether that's through a petition and you have a number of people that have signed on to the same issue and solution, whether it's gathering letters, whether it is creating a telephone tree and making sure that a number of phone calls are going to go into a certain office, or whether it is to gather people, actual physical bodies, in a place to make a presentation or to even make a presence known. Sometimes you make that support known not through actual individuals, but through representations of individuals. So I know there have been some incredible legislative efforts on the State House steps at the state level, state capitals, where foster, adoptive, and kinship parents and youth have gathered together shoes that represent every child still waiting for permanency and placed those shoes on the State House steps. Imagine the power of seeing thousands of shoes on the steps signifying every child who was without a permanent, sustainable family relationship. Sometimes people use dolls. Sometimes people use ribbons on a tree. There are so many ways to sort of demonstrate how big your support is. You want to develop maybe a white paper or some kind of a briefing about what your recommendations are, what your strategy is to get there, how you feel a system can handle this strategy, who the partners will be and who the players will be. And then at every point along the line, you want to stop and evaluate your efforts to date. You want to regroup and see if there's something that you need to change or a new direction or a shift that you might want to make, and then you want to continue on.
All right, leadership. So the way we think about leadership in the context of advocacy needs to be different than the way you think about leadership in a work environment or a team environment. And the big difference here is being trauma-informed. Oftentimes when we think about a leader, they work on a consequence model. If something doesn't get done, if it doesn't get done correctly, there are consequences. There are negative follow-ups to prompt a positive result. And the thing about this system is that it does not work for individuals who have one, mental illness or a history of trauma. And again, a history of trauma can manifest in a full spectrum of different behaviors and sensitivities. And when you work on that consequence model, when you work on that I'm in charge and you will listen to me podium, you cut yourself off from being able to engage young people, to engage people with a history of trauma, or any negativity associated with that power dynamic. To be a leader in advocacy, you need to be able to share the role. And again, sharing that power, sharing it with young people, sharing it with parents, allows them to feel that connection to the cause. It allows them to feel a sense of ownership over what you're trying to achieve together. This isn't a one-person show. These are changes that are affecting many people, and that's why it needs to have the shared hand of leadership of many people. Some things that you need to consider in this new definition of leadership so that you're not functioning on that consequence model that alienates people, excludes them, punishes them for things that are otherwise out of their control, is the idea that you need to see the best in people. You need to lift them up when they fail. You need to cultivate the sense of success and their strength through reinforcement and not just through tearing them down. There's an idea in strategic sharing during the debrief in which if you have to give feedback to a young person or an adult who has shared their story or testimony, because it's so incredibly personal to them, even giving feedback, however necessary it is, really needs to be framed in a way that's digestible. And that digestible way is called a sandwich. So it's a compliment sandwich in which you give, one piece of reinforcing advice about their testimony or experience, like I really loved the way you articulated this idea. Then you put in your criticism, the point in which you see them being able to improve themselves. You might be able to say, well, you really did miss this point, and you kind of, stumbled through these. I really think that, it's a little bit more practice. Maybe if you ground yourself physically on a table to kind of help yourself calm down, that you could deliver that better next time. And again, this is different than our traditional leadership model, and that is very sensitive to being able to highlight what's working and making sure that young people and adult advocates really know that you're invested in them and that you're willing to work on the parts that need to be, progressed in their performance, and that you're not just going to disown them or drop them or, inflict these consequences on them which may be reminiscent of their past traumatic experiences. And last, and we talk about this a lot, is the idea that the youth and adults that you're going to be engaging with are your partners. We can't just be up on that pedestal, like I said. We need to be able to see the other advocates that you're engaging as on an equal platform with you, as holding as much stake in the outcomes that you're trying to achieve as you do.
So you want to have a strategy, a really firm strategy that you're working from. Certainly you have a group process. In that group process, you want to brainstorm all kinds of ideas, and don't limit your ideas at all. Just let them free flow. Once they've all free flowed, then it's the time to really regroup and prioritize them. There are several different ways of doing that. Some people would like to flip chart and put, like a sort of a hierarchy. Everybody gets 3 choices, 1, 2, and 3 in that order of priority. And then you take a look and you see where you've landed in terms of what you're going to be looking at as your piece of advocacy and perhaps as your strategy as well. As I said earlier, you want to start with something that is winnable so that you keep people on board and keep people excited. Very important for folks to let go of their personal agenda. I've seen a number of excellent advocacy coalitions fall apart because a really strong person in a group would keep insisting that we had to follow their particular agenda for an item, even though that did not necessarily reflect the greater need or even the needs or interests of the whole group. And then there's a piece around gradients of agreement, and I will make sure that you get this as a handout when you get your follow-up handouts. But it's a way of thinking in advance about how you decide if you have a majority, how you decide if you can move forward, or if you really have to go back to the drawing board. And you want to think about everything that you're doing in terms of SMART goals. And that stands for being specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So they are not only SMART, but it's an acronym that will help you remember what it is that you're shooting for. We don't want to be vague. We can't go out there and say, all children should have a better education. Who's going to argue with that? Nobody, but it gets us nowhere. So we want to be very specific about what are the pieces that need to be in place to ensure that kids who have experienced foster care or adoption are able to engage in their education and make the most of it. You want to be able to measure the difference between what was happening before and where have we come, so that you can go back to your decision makers, your funders, your legislators, or whoever you need to say, see, this solution is working. Let's do more of it. Your goals have to be achievable. If they're not achievable, if they're pie in the sky, you are going to lose all of your support and all interest. People don't want to jump on either a losing bandwagon or a bandwagon that is just simply too pie in the sky. So that also goes along with realistic. What can we as a group achieve? How soon can we achieve it? And you want to make sure that you have it all broken down so that you can have a timetable around when you're going to get to certain pieces or certain legs of your tasks. These are several of the different approaches that you can take when you're doing your work in advocacy. Certainly now social media is bigger than ever in terms of getting a message out there. Use it wisely. Be careful about messages that might be misinterpreted or messages that might lose your supporters. Op-eds, letters to the editors, and feature stories are all incredibly helpful. One piece of advice that I will give you is that it's often more effective to be in a smaller community newspaper than to be in one of the bigger newspapers. Those smaller community newspapers are read by the people that we want to reach. They're read by our constituents, they're read by our communities, and they are in fact read by legislators in the district or by their aides and staff to get a pulse of what's happening. Legislative events are very, very effective, but they are also very time-consuming, and they can be costly, so think about that. Congressional briefings are a great way to get a story out there, congressional hearings and briefings, and I will underscore what Kayla said about taking the time to go and see that testimony that she had presented earlier. It was wonderful. We've seen time and again that foster and former foster youth and current foster youth have been able to sway the federal government to change policy and rewrite laws just by being heard. Public awareness campaigns, again, are very good at getting out to a lot of people. With a public awareness campaign, I'll caution you two things. One, you must be prepared to respond to people when they respond to you. We had a great public awareness campaign in a state that I used to work in, foster youth on TV in a public service ad talking about all the different ways that people could help foster youth, short of becoming a foster or an adoptive parent, really trying to reach out to a broader community. 10,000 phone calls came in as a response to that public awareness campaign, and unfortunately, the department in the locality did not have the capacity to respond to everybody and had not put together a plan for how to get folks out to other resources if they wanted to do something other than adopt or foster. So if they wanted to provide an internship or be a mentor or be a tutor or whatever else it could be, there was no way to connect them to that effort. So 10,000 people called, who knows, maybe 200 were interested in being foster or adoptive parents. Those 200 were the only ones that got a follow-up. You can imagine how that backfired with the public. Phone tree campaigns are huge. You'll hear more about this during the legislative piece, but I'll tell you now because I see how short we are on time. But if you can put together a phone tree campaign and get 5 to 10 people to call a legislator on any particular issue, that legislator has now decided that there is a movement afoot and they must act. And awards are a great way to thank people and to publicly put them on display for their good work. Always make sure that you have a good follow-up plan in place. You must be able to share your results with your partners. Thank people. Whether or not your effort was successful, you must go back and thank them. And I was in a training a couple of weeks ago with a very successful fundraise advisor who said that essentially you want to be able to thank people 7 times. Probably not all at once. You find different reasons to go back and thank them. You want to make wins public. And if you are successful, be sure that you have both the presence and the humility to go back and ask the people that you were trying to advocate with why it was that you were not successful in your effort. They almost always will be willing to tell you what mistakes you made or what missteps you made and be able to give you some advice for the next time. And then don't give up. Just keep going back there. Repeat, repeat, repeat. My former director, Joe Kroll, talks about a piece of legislation that was just passed last year that he was personally working on for 21 years with anyone that would work with him. So that kind of stick-to-itiveness is what pays off in the long run. In terms of legislative advocacy, the first thing you need to know is that you matter. You as an individual are huge. You are the one that voted for a legislator. You are the one that can tell them what it is that you want to do. But the only way to make a difference is to be heard. As I said about the calls, 3 are important, 10 are huge. But finally, the thing to realize is that legislators, although they've been elected into office, they're not the experts on everything. Their staff, their aides, they are very helpful to them, and as well their constituents help them to know what it is that needs to be fixed. This power map is just a way to think about sort of the bullseye of who it is that you want to make the actual commitments, but that there are many other levels and layers to who it is that you can talk to, work with, and try to influence. When you are communicating, you want to first identify yourself, why you're interested in this issue, why it matters. You want to be very specific and concise and make the issue personal. Paint a picture for the person you're talking to. Get them involved in it emotionally. And be very confident about the fact that you are probably the expert on the field because of your personal experience. Also know that you need to back up your position with data, facts, and research. And always be sure to make a prompt follow-up. I look forward to people asking me a question that I don't know the answer to. I won't ever make up an answer, but I will say, I'll be back to you with an answer or with someone who can give you an answer tomorrow or the next day. This gives me an opportunity for a second time to interact with that person. It gives me an opportunity to confirm what they may have agreed to do with me. And it gives me an opportunity to demonstrate for them that I'm a resource they can count on. This is just a real quick shot at the various ways that you can deliver your messages. People worry about lobbying. Oftentimes, if you're involved in a nonprofit, you have to think about the fact that if you're lobbying, you are going against what your mandate is or what your agreement is with developing your 501c3 or your other nonprofit status. Essentially, the difference between lobbying and educating is that with educating, we're simply communicating the issues. With lobbying, we're communicating the issues, but then we're making a specific ask. And that ask would be either about legislative language or funding for a certain program. As long as you have not done either of those two things, you have not lobbied. So just think about, as a citizen, you have a right, you also have a responsibility to express your views with your legislators, and legislators expect you to express them with them. As a person who is in any of these roles, adult, educator, parent, student, advocate, you also have expertise. And so do use that expertise.
All right, we're going to talk about Hill visits very quickly since we're short on time. The first two things that we have listed are knowing your message and prepare your main points. Even before you make your Hill visit, you want to have those down concretely. Hill visits are a huge undertaking. They take a lot of planning in some cases to travel, and you really want to make sure that even before you step through the door, you know exactly what you're asking for and the issues that you're bringing up. Third, you should have an elevator speech. Now, essentially what an elevator speech is, it's just a 2-minute introduction of who you are, your connection to the topic, again, that personal connection, and a concise summary of your stance. Considering it's a Hill visit, you may also want to include information about your voting district so that they know that you're a constituent. Like we mentioned before, sometimes people are a little disappointed that they're not sitting down with Al Franken themselves, that it's just a staff member. But those staff members in themselves hold an incredible amount of power, especially depending on who you're able to meet with. And in some cases, they may even be better at communicating the bullet points of your concise message to the senator or representative better than they would have taken the notes themselves, considering how busy they are. And again, seeing if they have that personal connection to the issue really roots in their minds the importance of what you're bringing to the table and the conversation that you had that day. You also want to make sure to take note of what to do next. If a staff member or a member of the legislature is interested in what you've brought to the table and the issues that you've brought up, and they begin discussing next steps with you, that are along the side of your ask, you really want to make sure to have the follow-through to get these things done. You don't want to dissuade action on these different topics based on your inactivity or your forgetfulness of the next step that you discussed. And this is just a small thing that can have a lot of impact, but making sure to follow up with your visit with a thank you card or an email. It's something that I've done on all of my Hill visits, and it's just a nice way to thank the staff and the senator or representative for meeting with you and also remind them of the conversation that you had with them.
One thing that I will say real quickly about that, asking about a personal connection, the most recent Hill visits that I went on were in connection to kinship care, and the person I was presenting with asked immediately about the staff member's personal connection to kinship care. He revealed that he had grown up with his cousin being raised by his mother alongside of him as a sibling. And so as my partner started talking about the program that she ran that worked with kinship providers and indicated to him that her funding was going to be running out at the end of the fiscal period, he immediately said, if there's anything we can do to help you get more funding, please let us know. We will write letters, we will do phone calls, whatever we can do to help you. So very powerful stuff. These are just some of the ways that you can get connected, find out who your key legislators are. Although laws are made on all kinds of things, the real final say comes down to the Finance Committee on the Senate side and the Ways and Means Committee on the House side, because everything has a financial cost to it. Those are the people that really have the final say on many, many, many issues. And the Congressional Caucus on Foster Youth has a number of members that are both members of the caucus, but also will serve on either finance or ways and means. Those are some key people that we want to be thinking about as we advocate.
So other considerations, you really want to take into consideration the partnerships that you've built with those other organizations. Oftentimes when we have our ask that we've been promoting and we've been collaborating with other organizations on, we kind of take for granted our role in also supporting those partnerships. Making sure that you are taking care of the priorities established between you and your collaborating organizations is going to be really important for you to be able to maintain those relationships. And sometimes that just means being able to provide assistance and provide support and resources for something that maybe isn't a main facet of your ask. It's the idea that you have to give in order to get. And sometimes the intersecting interests that we have to take priority over the small steps that we're trying to take with our personal asks if we're going to be able to continue with our partnerships in the future.
Lastly, here's our Advocates for Families First information and our Community Champions Network information. You can reach Kayla or myself for more questions. This has been a CCN presentation, but as I said earlier, there are some resources at Advocates for Families First that I think would be helpful for you in terms of developing your messages. We had a few kind of quick questions that I can answer right now. One individual had asked if we have certificates of attendance, and we certainly can put those together for you and get them out to you. Another person had asked about updated slides. I think that it's perhaps true that the original handout you got with the slides on it might have been a little bit different. We will send you those slides, as well as, I believe it's about a 10 or a 12-page document that we have put together, very comprehensive document about advocacy issues and how to go about advocating. Lots of great advice, lots of great resources within that document. In your email, we will send you as well the direct connection to that YouTube video of the testimony.
Yes. We really do encourage you to watch that on your own, and we're sorry it wasn't able to play during the duration of our webinar.
Yeah, I do apologize for that. As the presenter, it was working on my end, and we had tried to embed it, but it never did work. But I've watched it, and it is absolutely, Kayla's absolutely correct. It's the best I've ever seen, I think. And any other resources that you might think of, that you might want, that you might need, just give us a shout, and we're here to help you. Have a great day, folks. We appreciate you being on the webinar with us.
Yes, thank you for attending.